My parents left me after a horrific crash to care for my newborn sister, so I exposed the truth they buried for 13 years and watched their world burn. They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that sometimes your own blood can be the coldest thing you'll ever feel. My name is Nathaniel Evans, I'm 27 years old, and for most of my life I believed I was part of the perfect family. My father, Richard Evans, is a respected surgeon at the city's main hospital. My mother, Diane Evans, teaches high school English and volunteers at the local church. From the outside we looked like something straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting, the ideal American family that everyone admired and envied. But perfection, I've learned, is often just a carefully constructed lie. I should have known something was wrong years ago, but when you're a kid, you accept the reality your parents create for you. You don't question why family photos from certain periods are missing, or why your parents change the subject whenever someone asks about the scars on your face and arms. You don't think it's strange that you have this persistent feeling of being an outsider in your own home, even when everyone tells you how lucky you are to have such wonderful parents. The scars came from a car accident when I was 14. That much I remembered clearly: the screech of brakes, the sound of crushing metal, waking up in a hospital bed with tubes running into my arms and a machine beeping steadily beside me. What I didn't remember clearly was everything that came after. My memories of those months were fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle that never quite fit together properly. For 13 years I accepted the version of events my parents told me. They said it had been a difficult time for the whole family. Mom had just given birth to my sister Emma, and they were juggling caring for a newborn while worrying about me in the hospital. It was the hardest period of our lives, Mom would say whenever the subject came up, which wasn't often. But we got through it together, as a family. Emma is 13 now, and she's the golden child. Straight A's, captain of the debate team, already being courted by prestigious high schools. My parents beam with pride when they talk about her accomplishments, post her achievements all over social media, and never miss one of her events. She's everything they ever wanted in a daughter, and watching them with her, I sometimes felt like I was looking at the family I was supposed to be part of but somehow never quite belonged to. Don't get me wrong, Emma isn't the problem. She's a great kid, smart and funny and kind. She looks up to me, asks for help with her computer programming projects, and genuinely seems to care about me. But there's always been this invisible wall between me and my parents that she doesn't have to deal with. They celebrate her victories and comfort her defeats, while mine are met with polite acknowledgement at best. The first crack in my perfect family facade appeared 6 months ago, completely by accident. I was helping my parents clean out the attic when I knocked over a box of old documents. As I was gathering the scattered papers, I found something that made my blood run cold: my medical records from the accident. I probably shouldn't have read them, but curiosity got the better of me. What I found in those pages didn't match the story I'd been told for 13 years. The records showed that I'd been in the hospital for 3 months, not the few weeks my parents had always claimed. I'd undergone 7 surgeries, not the couple of minor procedures they'd described. Most shocking of all, there were notes from doctors and nurses about my emotional state, describing a 14-year-old boy who was withdrawn, frequently crying for his parents, and showing signs of abandonment anxiety. One note in particular stood out: patient continues to ask when his family will visit. Social worker has been consulted regarding apparent lack of family support during recovery. I stared at those words for a long time, trying to make sense of them. Lack of family support? But my parents had told me they'd been there every day, that they'd barely left my side. I must have been misremembering because of the trauma and pain medication, right? That night at dinner, I casually brought up the accident. I was thinking about when I was in the hospital after the crash, I said, cutting my chicken carefully. It's weird how I can't really remember you guys being there much. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees, Dad's fork froze halfway to his mouth, and Mom's smile became strained. Well, honey, Mom said carefully, you were on a lot of pain medication, and we were dealing with Emma being so young. The hospital had restrictions about bringing babies into the ICU. But Emma would have been with a babysitter or something, right? I mean, you could have visited without her. Dad cleared his throat. Son, we were there as much as we could be. You have to understand, it was a complicated time. Your mother had just given birth, she was recovering herself, and we had to balance taking care of a newborn with being there for you. Something in his tone made me push a little harder. How often did you visit? My parents exchanged a look that I'd seen countless times before but never really understood until that moment. It was the look of two people silently coordinating their story. "We visited regularly," Dad said firmly. "The important thing is that you recovered and came home healthy." But I wasn't satisfied. Over the next few weeks, I found myself paying attention to details I'd never noticed before, like how my parents had dozens of photos of Emma's first few months of life. Professional newborn shoots, candid moments, family portraits, but no pictures of our family during the same period. Like how they could describe Emma's every milestone from her first weeks, but became vague and uncomfortable when I asked about my recovery process. I started having trouble sleeping, lying awake at night trying to piece together fragments of memory. I remembered being scared and alone, but I'd always attributed that to being a sick kid in a strange place. Now I was beginning to wonder if there was more to it. The turning point came when I decided to contact the hospital directly. I told them I was working on a project about my recovery and wanted to speak with any staff members who might remember my case. It was a long shot, after all it had been 13 years, but sometimes long shots pay off. Margaret O'Sullivan had been a nurse in the pediatric ICU for 35 years before retiring. She remembered me immediately when I called. "Oh my goodness, Nathaniel Evans," she said, her voice warm but tinged with sadness. "How could I forget you? You were such a brave little boy but so heartbroken. I always wondered what happened to you." "Heartbroken?" I asked, though something deep in my stomach already knew what she was going to say. "Honey, you cried for your parents every single day for the first month. We kept telling you they would come visit soon, but—" She paused, and I could hear her taking a breath. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but it broke all our hearts. You were so young and so hurt, and you kept asking when your mom and dad were coming." My hand was shaking as I held the phone. "How often did they visit?" Another pause. "Sweetie, in the 3 months you were with us, your parents came to see you exactly twice. Once when you were first admitted and unconscious, and once the day before you were discharged." The words hit me like a physical blow. Twice. In 3 months. While I was lying in a hospital bed, scared and in pain, recovering from multiple surgeries, my parents had visited me twice. "But," I managed to say, "they told me they were there all the time. They said they barely left my side." Margaret's voice became very gentle. "Oh honey, I'm so sorry you didn't know. We tried to reach out to them, asked the social worker to get involved, but they always had excuses. Your mother had just had a baby, your father was busy with work." We understood to a point, but it was unusual. Most parents, even with newborns, would find a way to visit their injured child more than twice in 3 months. After I hung up, I sat in my car outside my office building for 2 hours, just trying to process what I'd learned. My entire understanding of my own history had been built on a lie. The story my parents had told me, about being there for me, about it being a difficult time that we'd gotten through together as a family, was complete fiction. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I went through my parents' social media history from 13 years ago. What I found there made me physically sick. While I was lying in a hospital bed, crying for parents who wouldn't come, they were posting pictures of Emma's nursery, photos of her first smiles, her first attempts to hold her head up, family outings to the park where my father pushed her stroller while my mother walked beside them, looking radiantly happy. There were posts about sleepless nights with a newborn, about the joys and challenges of being new parents again, about how blessed they felt to have such a beautiful daughter. There wasn't a single mention of me, not one post asking for prayers for their injured son, not one photo of them at the hospital, not one word about the traumatic accident that had nearly killed their firstborn child. According to their social media presence, I simply didn't exist during those 3 months. But what made it even worse was seeing the dates. 3 days after my accident, they'd posted a professional family photo shoot with baby Emma. A week after my first surgery, they'd thrown her a blessing ceremony with extended family and friends. 2 weeks after my second surgery, they'd taken her on a weekend trip to the lake, posting sunset photos with captions about making memories as a family of 4. A family of 4. Not 5? They'd literally written me out of the family narrative while I was fighting for my life. I confronted them the next evening. I waited until Emma was at a friend's house, then sat them down in the living room with printouts of my medical records and screenshots of their social media posts from that time. "I need you to explain something to me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage burning in my chest. I spread the papers out on the coffee table like evidence in a trial. My mother's face went pale when she saw what I'd brought. "Nathaniel," she started, but I held up my hand. "I spoke with Margaret O'Sullivan yesterday. She was my nurse at the hospital. She remembers me very clearly, and she remembers that you visited me exactly twice in 3 months." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping, and my mother was staring at the papers like they might spontaneously combust. "Son," Dad finally said, "you have to understand." "No," I interrupted. "You have to understand. I've been living with the belief that my family was there for me during the worst time of my life. I've been grateful to you for sacrificing and struggling alongside me." "But you weren't there, were you?" Mom started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who'd been caught, who was already calculating damage control. "It wasn't that simple," she said. "I had just given birth. I was exhausted, hormonal, trying to breastfeed. The hospital was 40 minutes away, and Emma needed me. I needed you too." The words exploded out of me with such force that both my parents flinched. I was 14 years old and I was dying, and I needed my parents. "You weren't dying," Dad said defensively. "You were injured, yes, but you were in good hands. The doctors said you would recover fully." "I had 7 surgeries, Dad. 7. I was in the ICU for a month, and then another 2 months in recovery. I was terrified and alone. And according to the nurses, I cried for you every day. We couldn't just abandon Emma," Mom said, her voice getting sharper. "She was a newborn. She needed constant care. You were getting professional medical attention, but she only had us." "She had both of you," I shouted. "I had no one." "That's not fair," Dad said, standing up. "We made the best decisions we could under impossible circumstances. We had to prioritize. You had to choose between your children, and you chose her." The words hung in the air like a slap. We all knew it was true, but hearing it said out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "It wasn't a choice," Mom whispered. "It was necessity." "Really?" I pulled out my phone and started reading from their old social media posts. Day 10 after my accident. Emma smiled for the first time today. "Our hearts are so full. #blessed, #newborn, #family life." Day 15. Weekend getaway with our little princess. Sometimes you just need to disconnect and focus on what matters most. Day 23. Emma's blessing ceremony was perfect, so grateful for our church family and this beautiful gift from God. I looked up at them, and I could see the exact moment they realized how damning their own words were. "You weren't making impossible choices, Mom. You were making comfortable ones. It was easier to focus on the healthy baby who made you look like perfect parents than to deal with the broken son who needed you desperately." "That's not true," Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then explain this to me," I said, pulling out the most damning piece of evidence I'd found. "This is a group text thread from your church mom group, from 6 months after my accident. Someone asked how I was doing, and you wrote, 'Nathaniel is doing so much better. It was a really scary time, but we never left his side. Richard practically lived at the hospital, and I was there every day until visiting hours ended. It really brought our family closer together.'" I looked up at them. "You told people you practically lived at the hospital. You told them it brought our family closer together. But you visited me twice, Mom. Twice." The mask was finally slipping. I could see the calculation in their eyes, the rapid assessment of how much damage control they could do. "People don't need to know all the details of our private struggles," Mom said carefully. "Private struggles? You mean lies? We did what we thought was best for everyone involved," Dad said. "And look how well you turned out. You're successful, healthy, independent. Our decisions didn't harm you." I stared at him in disbelief. "Didn't harm me? Dad, I've spent 13 years feeling like an outsider in my own family. I've always wondered why I felt so disconnected from you both, why I never felt like I quite belonged. I thought there was something wrong with me." "There's nothing wrong with you," Mom said quickly. "We love you, do you? Because love isn't something you claim to feel. Love is something you show through your actions. And your actions told a 14-year-old boy that he wasn't worth visiting in the hospital." I started gathering up my papers, suddenly exhausted by the whole confrontation. "You know what the worst part is? It's not even that you chose Emma over me. It's that you've been lying about it ever since. You've been letting me believe that we went through that trauma together as a family, when the truth is that you left me to go through it alone. Where are you going? Mom asked as I stood up. I need some time to think about all of this. Nathaniel, please don't do anything rash, Dad said. We can work through this as a family. I stopped at the door and turned back to look at them. That's the thing, Dad. I'm not sure we are a family. I'm not sure we ever were. Over the next few weeks, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the grateful son who accepted whatever scraps of affection my parents threw my way. I was done pretending that our relationship was normal or healthy, and I was definitely done protecting their reputation at the expense of my own truth. I started reaching out to family friends, relatives, people who had been part of our lives during that time. I told them what I'd discovered, showed them the evidence, asked them what they remembered. The picture that emerged was even more damaging than I'd imagined. My Aunt Rebecca, Dad's sister, admitted that she'd offered multiple times to help with Emma so my parents could visit me more. They'd always declined, saying they had everything under control. My mother's best friend confessed that she'd been shocked by how little my parents talked about my condition, how they seemed more focused on showing off their new baby than dealing with their injured son. Most tellingly, I discovered that my parents had been actively crafting a narrative about being devoted caregivers while I was hospitalized. They'd told people about their sleepless nights at the hospital, their heartbreak over seeing me in pain, their relief when I finally turned the corner. None of it was true, but it had been their story for 13 years. The final straw came when I was going through some old photo albums with Emma. She was asking about why there were no pictures of her as a newborn with me, and I found myself looking at the family photos from that time period with new eyes. There were dozens of pictures of Emma's first months, but in every single one, it was just the three of them. Mom, Dad, and Emma. I had been erased from the family narrative so completely that someone looking at these photos would never know they had another child. Where was I during all of this? I asked Emma, showing her a photo of them at some family gathering when she was about 3 months old. I don't know, she said, frowning. Mom and Dad always said you were still recovering, but you look fine in the pictures from around that time. She was right. There were a few scattered pictures of me from that period, and while I was clearly thinner and had some visible scars, I looked healthy enough to be included in family activities. Emma, I said carefully, do you remember Mom and Dad ever talking about visiting me in the hospital? She shook her head. They always said it was too hard to talk about, that it was a really dark time for the family, and they preferred to focus on how well you recovered. Too hard to talk about. Dark time for the family. They'd been rewriting history for so long that they'd probably started to believe their own lies. That's when I decided to stop protecting them. I wrote everything down, the whole story with documentation, medical records, nurse testimonies, social media screenshots, text message evidence. I laid out the timeline of their lies, the ways they'd manipulated the narrative to make themselves look like devoted parents while completely abandoning their injured child. Then I did something that I'd never had the courage to do before. I posted it publicly. I shared my story on social media, tagged the relevant family members and family friends, and let the truth speak for itself. I didn't editorialize or dramatize. I just presented the facts and let people draw their own conclusions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with calls and messages from family friends, relatives, and even some of my parents' colleagues. People were shocked, angry, and heartbroken on my behalf. The perfect family image that my parents had worked so hard to maintain for 13 years crumbled in a single day. My Aunt Rebecca called me crying, apologizing for not pushing harder to visit me herself, for not recognizing how badly I was being neglected. Family friends admitted they'd always felt something was off about my parents' story, but hadn't wanted to pry. Even some of Dad's colleagues from the hospital reached out, expressing their disbelief that a doctor could abandon his own child during a medical crisis. But the most important call came from Emma. Is all of this true? She asked, her voice small and shaky. Yes, I said simply. They really only visited you twice? According to the nurse who was there, yes. There was a long silence. I'm so sorry, Nathaniel. I had no idea. It's not your fault, Em. You were a baby. But I've been the reason they ignored you all these years, haven't I? They've always paid more attention to me, always cared more about my stuff than yours. It broke my heart to hear her figuring it out. Emma, listen to me. You are not responsible for our parents' choices. You didn't ask to be born, and you didn't ask them to neglect me. That's on them, not you. What's going to happen now? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm done pretending everything is fine. My parents, meanwhile, were in full damage control mode. Dad called me screaming about how I was destroying the family, how I was hurting Emma by airing our private business, how I was being vindictive and cruel. Mom tried a different approach, attempting to guilt me by crying about how humiliated she was, how I was ruining their reputation, how people were looking at them differently now. Neither of them apologized. Neither of them acknowledged the pain they'd caused me. Their only concern was managing the fallout from their exposed lies. The breaking point came at Sunday dinner the following week. I'd agreed to come, partly because Emma had begged me to, and partly because I wanted to see if my parents were capable of any genuine remorse. They weren't. Instead of addressing what they'd done, they tried to control the narrative one more time. Dad launched into a speech about how families go through difficult times, how people make different choices under stress, how the important thing was that everyone had turned out fine in the end. The real question, he said, looking directly at me, is why you're trying to destroy everything we've built together. Why you're hurting your sister and your mother over something that happened 13 years ago. That's when I realized they would never understand. They would never take responsibility. They would never genuinely apologize for abandoning me when I needed them most. You're right, Dad, I said, standing up from the table. This is about what we've built together. And what we've built is a relationship based on lies, manipulation, and my willingness to accept being treated as less important than everyone else in this family. That's not true, Mom protested. Isn't it? When's the last time you celebrated one of my achievements the way you celebrate Emma's? When's the last time you asked about my life, my goals, my problems? When's the last time you treated me like a son instead of an obligation? The silence at the table was deafening. I've spent 13 years trying to earn your love and attention, I continued. I thought if I was successful enough, independent enough, undemanding enough, maybe someday you'd care about me the way you care about Emma. But the truth is, you made your choice when I was 14 years old and you've been sticking to it ever since. We love you, Mom said desperately. No, you don't. You love the idea of being good parents. You love the story you tell about yourselves. But you don't love me, because if you did, you would have been there when I needed you most. I looked around the table one last time. At my father, who was red-faced with anger. At my mother, who was crying crocodile tears. At Emma, who looked heartbroken but not surprised. I'm done, I said simply. I'm done pretending this is a normal family. I'm done accepting crumbs of affection and calling it love. I'm done protecting your reputation at the expense of my own well-being. You can't just walk away from your family, Dad said. Watch me. And I did. I walked out of that house and never went back. The aftermath was complicated. Some family members tried to play peacemaker, encouraging me to forgive and forget, to think about the family unity. Others were firmly on my side, appalled by what my parents had done and supportive of my decision to cut contact. Emma and I maintained our relationship, but it was different now. She was dealing with her own realization that her parents weren't the people she'd thought they were, and I was trying to help her understand that their treatment of me didn't diminish their love for her. They do love you, Em, I told her during one of our coffee dates. Their ability to love you genuinely doesn't change the fact that they failed me. People are complicated that way. But how can they love me and not love you? She asked. I think they loved the idea of me that they wanted, not the actual me. You fit their vision of the perfect daughter. I was just a reminder of a time when things didn't go according to their plan. The hardest part wasn't losing my parents. I'd lost them 13 years ago, I just hadn't realized it. The hardest part was rebuilding my understanding of myself and my worth outside of their dysfunction. I started therapy, which helped me understand that the feeling of not quite belonging that had haunted me my entire life wasn't a character flaw. It was a natural response to being emotionally neglected by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I also started building a chosen family of friends who actually showed up for me. People who celebrated my successes, supported me through difficulties, and treated me like I mattered. It was amazing how different it felt to be genuinely cared about after a lifetime of emotional scraps. A year later, I'm in a completely different place. I have a job I love, relationships that fulfill me, and most importantly, I have a clear understanding of my own worth. I don't need my parents' approval or love anymore, because I've learned what real love actually looks like. My parents, meanwhile, are dealing with the long-term consequences of their choices. Their reputation in the community never fully recovered from the revelation of how they'd treated me. Dad lost some patients who couldn't trust a doctor who would abandon his own child. Mom faced questions from colleagues and church members that she couldn't satisfactorily answer. More importantly, they lost their son, not because I died in that hospital bed 13 years ago, but because they killed the relationship through their own selfishness and neglect. Sometimes I wonder if they regret their choices, if they lie awake at night thinking about the different ways things could have gone if they'd just been the parents I needed them to be. But mostly, I don't think about them at all anymore. I've learned that family isn't about blood or obligation or shared history. Family is about showing up. It's about being there when someone needs you, even when it's inconvenient or difficult. It's about choosing to love someone through their worst moments, not just celebrating them during their best ones. My parents had the chance to be my family when I was lying in that hospital bed, scared and in pain and calling for them. They chose not to be. They chose a more convenient love, an easier path, a prettier story. That was their choice to make. But cutting them out of my life? That was mine. And for the first time in my adult life, I finally understand what it feels like to put my own well-being first. It feels like coming home to myself after being lost for 13 years. They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned that sometimes the blood that should bind you together is the very thing that drowns you. The real family, the people who deserve your love and loyalty, are the ones who choose to stay when staying is hard, who show up when showing up matters, who love you not despite your worst moments but through them. I finally found that family. It just didn't include the people who gave birth to me.